Welcome to the Ordinary Extraordinary Cemetery, where every death had a life and every life had a story. My name is Jenny Johnson.
Hello, and I'm Diane Hartshorn.
And we have a lovely guest joining us today. We are going to learn a little bit more about the cemeteries in Charleston, South Carolina. But before we introduce our guest, we do have a quick announcement to make. Starting or coming to Colorado, to Evergreen Cemetery specifically on
In
July
Colorado Springs,
13th, is the 48 state tour with
Atlas Preservation and John Appels. So we're very excited. This will be John's third visit to Evergreen Cemetery. And looking forward to meeting new people who will want to take advantage of this free course or workshop, and then join us in preserving our two cemeteries.
Yeah. So it's 9 a.m., July 13th, Evergreen Cemetery. It's open to anybody who wants to come. So if you're interested in learning about restoration, cleaning headstones, that kind of work that happens that we talk about all the time, this is an opportunity to get some hands-on experience, to learn from somebody who's been doing it for eons now. I mean, John's been doing it for a long, long time. And like I said, this is their 48 state tour, which they just started doing. So it means they go to all the lower 48 states in the US. So if you're outside of the US, I'm sorry. And if you're in Alaska or Hawaii, we're sorry. They don't go there. But if you want to check, we will link their information plus the stuff in our show notes, so you can check for your state to find out where they're going to be and when. So if you've wanted to learn how to do restoration, or even just learn how to properly clean a headstone or something like that, this is a great opportunity. It doesn't cost anything. You get to spend the day in the cemetery learning, and you'll take away some really great information to help you further your restoration and preservation efforts in your local cemeteries.
Yeah.
So definitely make sure. Oh, go ahead.
No, I was going to say John is one of the best.
Yeah. So make sure you check the show link or the show notes for those links if it's something you're interested in learning more about. And so now we will introduce today's guest all the way from Charleston, South Carolina. We are super excited to have on the show with us today, Patrick Harwood. Patrick has been exploring and researching the Charleston, South Carolina cemeteries. He's got a couple of books. His most recent book out, and I'm sorry, I just pulled it back up so I get the title correct, and now I lost it.
Stories from the Underground, the Churchyards of Charleston.
So exciting. So welcome to the show, Patrick.
Thank you so much, Diane and Jenny. I really appreciate you having me on, and I'm a big fan of your podcast.
Oh, thank you.
Well, thank you. Well, I know Diane personally is excited to learn more about these cemeteries, having been to the circular church there.
The first time as a big girl that I went anywhere was clear back in 1984. I flew out to Charleston, South Carolina, and I went to the Circular Congregational Church, and was blown away by the age of the tombstones. Because, living in Colorado, this is definitely 200 or 300, at least a good 200 years older than we are. And even though I loved cemeteries before, this is what really pushed me over the edge to get involved in cemetery restoration and preservation, even though it took a few years, getting married, having kids, and all that fun stuff before I started doing this. But this was actually the tipping point, the stepping off point for me. So I'm so excited to have Patrick join us and share so much about these cemeteries. And then going through things before we started, is like, there are so many cemeteries and churchyards in Charleston. They have their own cemetery preservation organization. I mean, it was amazing. I couldn't believe it when I just was looking real quick before we started.
You picked a good one to visit, because Circular Congregational has the oldest church graves in the Charleston area. Charleston was founded in 1670, and Circular Congregational has a handful of graves from the 1600s.
So, and there's, looking at the photo behind Diane, you can see the church and some of the graves.
So yeah, Charleston has a rich mix that I'll go into in the presentation I'm going to bring up shortly. but you'll see how much we have to offer. And it's a very historic city in many ways, one of the most prominent and wealthiest colonial cities in America back during that time period. And its graveyards, its church graveyards especially, reflect diversity and rich cultural heritage and influences in what is affectionately known as the Holy City, Charleston, South Carolina.
How cool. It's somewhere that I hadn't really considered visiting until I really started getting into more cemetery research. And then that led me to more of the history of South Carolina in general. And then I realized Charleston is definitely on the bucket list of cities to go visit if you really want to visit like historical American cities, because there's, like you said, there's so much diversity and so much going on there. And I think maybe, and this is just me from traveling to other like coastal cities, I love cities that are affected by the water. Because the lifestyle when you live on the water or near the water like that is just so different than anywhere else. And maybe it's because I've always lived where we're landlocked. And so even though my dad was in the Navy, we've always lived in the middle of places and not near the ocean. So I always love learning more about those cities that their commerce and everything was affected by the water. So in Charleston is one of those cities. So Patrick, go ahead and take it away with your presentation. We're excited to see the photos you have and learn more.
Sure. Well, yeah, do let me know, both of you, if you do come to the Charleston area. I'd be more than happy to show you around it.
I don't know.
Charleston's known for its great restaurants also, so you definitely will eat and dine well.
Jenny and I have so many bucket list cemeteries we want to travel to together. I think we may need to add this one.
And what's great is when we start doing this with all our guests, we have a lot of tour guides who are ready for us once we are able to get to them. So I love that.
Right. And as you'll see, Charleston also has a very historic, beautiful Victorian era rural cemetery, Magnolia Cemetery, that dates to 1850, that I've written 2 books actually about that I'll touch on in the presentation. So I have a lot of fun with the word Taphophile, which a lot of people don't know, even a genealogical group that I'm a member of. When I did a presentation last year, nobody had heard that word. So it was introduced to me by somebody who I'll touch on in the presentation. So yeah, so the stories from the underground, are you seeing this okay?
Yep.
Oh, great. Published in 2022. And it's always good to have kind of what I call an elevator pitch, something that kind of sums up what the book's about or the project. So This is what I came up with: examining Charleston's rich, interesting, and diverse history through the prism of its religious burial grounds. And the idea kind of came from my Magnolia Cemetery book that I self-published in 2014, as you see, In the Arms of Angels, Magnolia Cemetery, Charleston's Treasure of History, Mystery, and Artistry. It was one of the new rural Victorian cemeteries that was influenced by Mount Auburn in Cambridge, Massachusetts, which I just happened to be fortunate enough to visit last weekend on Sunday. My wife and I were up there. Our son had a birthday. He lives in New York, and he took the train up, and we flew. So we spent 3 or 4 days just visiting Boston, which I'd never been before. And Mount Auburn, it was more than I expected, as much as I expected, and even more so. So that was quite a treat. So yeah, the idea came from doing a book of that size and scale, 230 pages or so, full color, front to cover, hundreds and hundreds of stories. And I do all the photography myself, all the research, even the layout. So I've become, knowledgeable about Adobe InDesign. So here's the thing about the Holy City that's very special, is you have something for everybody as far as the religions. There's 2, and this is all in the downtown historic district. We have 2 Catholic churches. There are 3 Anglican churches. There's Lutheran, Circular Congregational, Baptist, 2 Presbyterian churches, a French Huguenot, Jewish synagogue, and a Unitarian church.
You do have
all in
everything.
close proximity. Yeah, something for everybody and lots of flavors. So how did this come about? Something that made the Carolina colonies in the early days a little bit different from the other British colonies was the idea and that you only needed 7 people to form a religion in the Carolina colonies. Oops, I'm sorry, I think I just did that, but it's all right. I don't think you're on me anyway. So King Charles II tasked Sir Anthony Ashley Cooper, who was his Carolina Lord Proprietor, to, okay, we have this vast colony. From at that point, it stretched from the border of Virginia all the way to Florida. It's like, we have this now, let's get some people to move there, people from Europe and the Caribbean. So that was one of the incentives, the marketing incentives. And I make the point, was that marketing or was it magnanimous? And probably a little bit of both, but more the marketing. So that had kind of unprecedented religious freedom. And Lord Anthony Ashley Cooper was so influential and important that not one but 2 rivers in the Charleston area were named for him: the Ashley River and the Cooper River. Of course, Charleston's a peninsula, so we have the rivers. It's an ideal port. And an interesting thing about him that surprised me was Lord Anthony Ashley Cooper never actually visited or came to America himself. He kind of operated everything from London. So
that's an interesting way to promote something, especially then when it's not like he could have photographs or anything. He had to rely on what people told him it was like.
Mm-hmm. So generally the format of this book, go into early Charleston history, touching on the things I just mentioned, types of grave markers and monuments. There's such a rich variety of shapes and sizes and styles and symbols. I wanted it to be as comprehensive as possible, not just about the churches. I'll say churches, but I'm also including the Jewish synagogue. But I wanted it as comprehensive as possible in Charleston, in the peninsula area. So remembering Black cemeteries, what happened to them. Then I go in depth into the churches and that one synagogue in alphabetical order, but I also touch upon other significant burial sites on the peninsula. And then at the end, Charleston's historic cemetery district, which on the sort of outskirts of Charleston, where Magnolia Cemetery, that whole idea of getting burial sites out of the cities with all the epidemics that were going on, diseases, that's came over from England and France, Mount Auburn again being the first. So east of the Mississippi, just city after city started to do this, have this rural cemetery movement, and Magnolia is just a perfect example. It's so beautiful. But since that 1850, there were many, many other cemeteries that were developed near Magnolia. So that's, in recent years, has been designated the Charleston Historic Cemetery District. So I go into that in the book also. So in introducing each church, I designed this map so you can kind of show where they are in proximity to each other. I've actually taken student groups, which I'll talk about in a bit, walking it, and it was probably about a 3-mile walk, just over an hour, and we were able to see 14 of the, or 12 of the 14. Yeah, I wouldn't recommend it on an early September Charleston evening, hot and humid, because it was yeah.
I love that photograph, that first photo where you see the different spires for 3 different churches in a row.
So rooftop bar sometimes have the best angles on skylines. Cool. So here, I'll give you a sense of how I kind of go into each of the churches. So I want to give this the basic information, address, when it opened, the current existing building, and if there were earlier versions that might have been replaced, or there's a number of them were destroyed by fires over the years. This type of architecture, how accessible are the graveyards? So I really wanted this to be a resource, something I think all libraries should want to have, but also people interested in this, so how accessible are these? Are they always closed? Which many of them are always closed, except of course on Sundays is always a good time to go because they're still active churches. And these are all churches that have existing burial grounds. So that was kind of a key. So then I also give a number of distinctions, things that are unique about the founding, about different things about the different churches. So I touch on that. And a part that I'm really proud of that I was able to do was to get interior shots of all of them that I address in the book, because they're all so beautiful. They're so old, but still they're so well maintained, because frankly, Charleston is a big wedding destination. So a lot of weddings, people from around the state or really around the country will try to book these churches, whatever their denomination is. And one church I know of is like 2 years out. If you're interested to go there today, you'll have to wait a couple years. So yeah, have some observations and interesting tidbits about how the churches look on the inside, their sanctuaries.
I bet that's a great way to help with the upkeep of these churches, though.
Exactly. Yeah.
Sure. They make a lot of, it's a big revenue stream. So it's in their best interest to keep them looking really nice. So here's the St. Mary of the Annunciation Catholic Church. It's the oldest Catholic church south of Virginia. So,
so pretty.
Yeah, it's very opulent and artistic in so many ways. There's paintings and murals, top to bottom, wall to wall. So I'm Catholic, so Catholics, they like to kind of have a lot of edifices and symbolisms and art.
I'm just going to put out there to the Catholic diocese, if you're building a brand new church building, go back to building them like this. They're so much prettier.
Exactly.
They make sitting through Mass way more interesting.
Sure.
Especially if you have a really long-winded priest.
You got it. But look, in contrast, this is the First Baptist Church in Charleston.
So simple, but so pretty too.
Right. You're right. Just white, kind of austere, you could say. But and this is something I learned, is that the Baptist belief is there should not be any distractions during the service, that all attention should be on the pastor and what the message is. That one cross that you see top right is the only religious artifact you really see in it. I think there might be a 10 Commandments, but I was struck by definitely how white it is and the lack of any kind of art.
Now, did you happen
figures.
You said you were in Boston recently. Did you happen to go to the Old North Church while you guys were there?
Yes, absolutely.
It's very similar to this, with the boxed pews and the...
Sure. Yes, definitely. Yeah. I'm working on a blog post now about that. I'm active into blogging, which I could touch on a little bit more. So here's the Methodist Church, Bethel United Methodist Church, which is very nice. It used to have the upstairs balcony, but at a certain period of time after the Civil War, the blacks used to, and this was true at all the churches, they did have Black people and enslaved people were able to attend with the white people, but they usually had to sit up in the balcony or in the back. Separately. And at some point, the old church was replaced by this new one dating to the 1850s. And then after the Civil War, the balcony was removed and the church was literally moved across the street, Old Bethel, and that was given to the Black congregants. Another thing, I don't know if our images are blocking, but on the top, the right side here, after Hurricane Hugo, you can see it?
Yeah.
Or no? Okay. In 1989, Hurricane Hugo was a devastating hurricane that struck the Charleston area. So a lot of certainly buildings, including these churches, had damage, and Bethel United had damage. And when the stairwell leading up to the back balcony was being repaired, in the wall was discovered some graffiti from Union troops during the Civil War when Charleston was occupied in early 1865. There were Yankees that's where they would stay and live and stuff and sleep. And these drawings were found and wrote their names and things like that.
Oh, that's
So
cool.
today you can go up those stairs and it's lighted and there's a glass that covers it and protects it, but you can
Right.
see that. So that was quite a interesting find.
So every now and then Mother Nature uncovers something good in her wrath.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Maybe my favorite one that I was most impressed
I
with
love
was
this
the
floor.
Lutheran church that has had repairs after Hurricane Hugo. And then I think in 2011, there was also a major work that was being done. But I like how the entrance on the ground level has those sort of those
Mhm.
boxes. And then it continues from the front door all the way up the aisle to the altar. It just has that symmetry. And it was just, I mean, the place just looks like new. It's just so
It's gorgeous.
beautiful and gorgeous touches. And Lutheran churches, I'm going to say all, I'm not positive on that, but the tradition is that Lutheran churches around the country have red doors.
Mhm.
And the ones around Charleston do, that I've noticed. There's some other ones as well. But the reason for this is that it symbolizes unity with Martin Luther's Protestant Reformation that began in 1517 with his 95 Thesis. So the church that he was part of, Wittenberg Church in Germany, had red doors. And so that
That's interesting.
tradition carried on. So then as I continue with each, I go into the graveyards, okay? And I have a couple pages, just pictures and observations about how each graveyard is laid out, what kind of flora and fauna. And whenever I can sneak in a bird picture, I try to, because I'm an active. I've actually written books about birds and my bird photography. But so just how it's laid out and things that are interesting and distinctive about each one. And then we go into names and numbers, things like deep dive into how many people are buried in each graveyard. What are the most common last names or surnames? Prominent people buried there. What's the oldest grave in each? And also, what kind of graveyard records are available, whether through the
Right.
church itself, online sites, or libraries that might have books and things like that. Because again, look at this book as a resource that people who might be interested in looking into things, they would kind of have some ideas.
Yeah, it's a good starting point especially if you want to maybe hone in on one particular church or churchyard. Just gives
Sure.
you some ideas of where to start at least.
Mm-hmm. And then I have a few pages that I call 5 to Admire, just short little mentions of just particular grave markers, in some cases mausoleums, sarcophagus, as you see a nice
Yeah, that's
variety
cool.
here,
Yeah.
and just things that caught my eye because of their look, their design, that I just wanted to mention. Because again, just to kind of show off the diversity and how beautiful, unique some of the markers are that you see around the churchyards of Charleston. And then I go into more deeper stories about particular individuals within each. And you mentioned Jennie, you have the KKBE is called for short, the Jewish synagogue in Charleston. There's a tradition in the Jewish faith that synagogues don't have churchyards. Okay. They're not right next to the synagogue like the Christian
Right.
churches do, because there's a belief in the Jewish faith that the holy people, the rabbis, should not walk among the dead. So their burial grounds are several blocks away often. And that's the case in Charleston, with the Cumming Street Cemetery being
Mm.
several blocks from Hazel Street, where the synagogue is. So I have pieces about, for example, with the synagogue, Panina Moise, who was the first she's called a Jewess poetess in the U.S. to publish a book of poetry in 1853.
Oh, cool.
And a little item about that. And Civil War claims brothers in arms. So two brothers who fought for the Confederate Army, who both died during the war. And I have a bunch of that in my books. My Magnolia Cemetery book. I have a big chapter on the cemetery's Confederate legacy, and it includes a number of stories. I mean, one family had 3 brothers who died during the war.
Lost them all. Ugh.
Yeah, I have different stories about two brothers, and so it's certainly tragic. Now this is, if you don't mind, I'd like to read a little bit from this. This
Sure.
is the Unitarian Church, which is very distinctive. But saw this kind of lonely, isolated column, and I titled it "The Threshold of Womanhood." Okay, so here's what I wrote it. One of the saddest obituaries one may ever find is written about the death of Jessie Chapman, young woman, 19 years old, in late 1864. The obituary ran in the Aiken, South Carolina newspaper. Like many in Charleston, the Chapmans, in all likelihood, had fled the city amid the protracted federal bombardment during the Civil War's final few years. The obituary, likely written by Jessie's mother, Isabella, reads in part, and I'm quoting here, "On a quiet Sabbath morn, the angel of death touched and closed the eyes of our dear Jessie. The life, light, and joy of a mother bowed down by grief, who clung to her as the last sunbeam of her existence, the darling and cherished object of loving brothers to whom she was still the pet and child." Ugh, sorry, it's giving me shivers. She was continuing. "She was just on the threshold of womanhood, but so buoyant, so pure and guileless. The sweet bird-like voice we love to hear is now, we trust, joining in angelic choirs. That fragile form is, excuse me, is now clothed in robes of light and dazzling purity." Then I observed the column marker with its slanted, life-cut short top is in a rather lonely spot along the graveyard's east perimeter. Jessie was interred here with her sister Isabel, who's 26, who also died in Aiken 4 months before Jessie passed. The causes of the sisters' deaths could not be found today, but one of the era's pernicious diseases is highly suspected. The sisters were apparently first buried in Aiken, South Carolina. Online can be found an 1866 document signed by Charleston Mayor Peter Charles Gilliard. Quote, "Permission is granted for the opening of 2 graves in the Unitarian Church," it reads, followed by the names of the sisters. So they were buried first in Aiken and then disinterred and put in this spot. So yeah,
Their
wasn't
poor
that
mother.
sad and poignant? I mean, what a lovely obituary.
Yet they
You
don't
might
write
reckon-
obituaries quite as pretty anymore.
No,
I mean, that was some very lovely language to describe her daughter.
absolutely. St. Philip's Church, an old Anglican, one of the oldest churches in Charleston, is buried Alicia Rhett, who you might know that name if you are are you fans of Gone with the Wind movie?
I was going to say Rhett Butler.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. She played the sister. No, she wasn't the sister of Scarlett or Rhett, but
Was she one of Ashley's sisters?
yes, right. She had a small part. She was only in it for a few minutes, but hey, she
That was a
she
big movie to be in, though.
movie. Absolutely. And she was, well, born in Savannah, but from Charleston, and lived to be almost 100 years old.
Oh, wow.
So she's buried in the St. Philip's churchyard. Mary Alicia Rhett. She died in 2014. She's one of the more recent burials that I include in the book. But that was her one and only movie.
Oh.
She just wasn't really drawn to it. I'm sure she would have had other opportunities. And she was only 22 in 1937 when she was offered the role of India Wilkes, Ashley's sister. Yeah, the year before, a Hollywood director had spotted her at a play at Charleston's Dock Street Theater, the oldest theater in America, by the way. He was so impressed by her Southern charm and beauty, thinking she would be perfect for a part in Gone with the Wind. So she took a train out to Hollywood and she did her thing. She came back and she never did another movie. She didn't.
Just
She was
decided Hollywood life was not for her.
no, and there's certainly no mention of it on her modest. She seemed to be a very modest person, and her headstone is certainly modest. And it just says that after her name and her life years, that she was a portraitist. So she was an artist, And there was a work of hers that was available at Terrace Oaks Antique Mall not too long ago.
Oh, cool.
So she did a little radio work, but she lived a pretty quiet life, never married, never had children. So she's buried next to her parents. And Rhett is a very prominent old Charleston name. So there are Rhetts that go back to really 1670 with the first boats dropping off people in Charleston. In fact, an ancestor of hers, Colonel William Rhett, who is buried in that same cemetery. He's credited in 1718 with capturing and bringing to justice by hanging the pirate Stede Bonnet.
Oh,
Yeah.
I'm sorry. That's another Outlander reference.
So the way that conducted my research, personal observations, information from the churches and synagogues, whether they're online sites or even speaking to different people, emailing people, online searches, ancestry.com, find a grave, libraries, South Carolina room at the Charleston County Public Library is excellent and was very, very helpful. Even during COVID, when the library was closed. I worked on this book from 2019 to 2022, 4 years. So I could still, during COVID, email some people there, and they would get back to me. So it was
good.
Yeah, they were
Yeah, that was
wonderful
nice.
resource. And of course, tapping into other books, booklets, blogs, and research of others, and always, of course, giving proper attribution.
Right.
So, and that's something that draws me to this is there's just the research and just trying to find out more. You know, you might get a little glimpse or idea from the headstone and the inscriptions, the epitaphs. I mean, for example, the French Huguenot, that's a very interesting Charleston story because these were people who fled France. They were Protestants who were being persecuted by Catholics. Okay, the king was Catholic, the Pope was Catholic, of course. And so in the late 1600s into the 1700s, thousands and thousands fled France, and several thousand landed in Charleston, and they turned out to be very productive people. So you got to like the stones, like these ledgers that line after line after line, they kind of tell the story of how they ended up coming to America. And the French Huguenot, that's got to be the prettiest and most distinctive with that pinkish hue to it. That's the way it looks, and it's just beautiful. It's very small, so it's probably the smallest as far as inside how many people, and it's also a very small graveyard. But it has this is one of the mysteries in the book. Manigault is a very old Charleston name. In fact, Manigault still owns the Post and Courier newspaper, which have for generations. But there's this mysterious vault there that I did as much research as possible to find out who's there. And the early Manigauts, of course, are there. And based on the research, it turns out there's some 40 people are in that vault, you know, in the ground. And I'd be really curious what that must look like down in there.
Yeah, it's interesting the way they brick it over and make it so flat on top.
Right. And it's very mysterious because there's only the initial M on a couple of the corners for Manigault. But one of the ancestors actually documented, a Manigault woman herself. And I came across this with the assistance of the South Carolina room at the public library, lists all the people in that underground vault. And there's 40 some people, including a bunch of people killed in a hurricane in 1828. And it's actually typed out very neatly. So that was very interesting to come across a document like that, okay, here's the people who are down in there. Now I just want to kind of quickly touch upon some of the other interesting finds, things that surprised me that you and your viewers might find of interest. But in an old Anglican churchyard at St. Michael's, there's a pastor who on his tomb, there's what today we would call the Star of David.
Yeah.
So that had me scratching my head. I knew I spotted that few years before starting the book, and I was like, if I ever do a book like this, that's one I definitely want to find out more about. So, it turns out, I'll kind of give it away, but the Star of David has been used by cultures and religions for centuries and centuries before Hitler and his Nazis usurped it. Of course, made the Jews wear those
Right.
patches, and of course the Jewish flag is the Star of David, including the Masons had used it. So I believe that the Reverend here was a member of the Masons, and that's probably
Okay.
why it's on his, because you would think he's an Anglican minister, why does he have the Star of David? And the swastika used by the Nazis, same thing. It,
Yeah.
old American Indian tribes
Navajo.
way back. Oh, is that true? Navajos use the
Yeah,
swastika?
because I remember I was working in an antique store, and he was an Indian rug collector, and he had one up on the wall, and it had a couple of the swastikas. I think they were,
Wow.
and people were like, "Oh my goodness, I can't believe they have that up there." And it's like they didn't, it goes way
Way back
predates
before the Nazis decided to
Right.
put it on their flag.
Yeah. Fortunately, I didn't come across any gravestones that had swastikas on. That would be crazy, wouldn't it? Now, this is something really, really curious. In St. Mary of the Annunciation Catholic Church, there are portraits of all the 12 apostles, and the one of St. Peter that's up in the balcony in the corner, maybe they're trying to hide it. He has 6 toes on his right foot, has 6 toes, and there's no evidence that St. Peter had 6 toes. Okay. So,
Right.
and the church, the way I found out about this was it's on the church's website. So it's not something they try to hide. So I knew when I read that I got to see this for myself. So I went on a Sunday after Mass and asked for permission to go up and look at it. I asked the priest, what's the story there? And he really wasn't sure. At a book signing I had there in late 2022, I met the pastor, Reverend Droz, and he told me a story about, see, that church burned in a big fire, I think in the 1830s. And of course, although it had the 12 apostle paintings, they were all destroyed. And so at some point, some years after the fire, it was a member, the church wanted to recommission those paintings. So a particular member must have been pretty well off. I think he funded it, but they found this painter in Italy named Cesare Porta, and he did all the paintings. Well, they all come back, and St. Peter has 6 toes. And the Reverend Droz, I asked him about it, and he said, oh, the story I heard is that our member who commissioned, he had a son who was polydactyl, had 6 toes. And it's like, okay, well, so he told the the painter to put 6 toes on. So I'm a little skeptical of that theory. I've heard other theories, but my theory is that old Cesar might have been being a little facetious and just decided to poke a little fun at St. Peter, because at St. Peter's Basilica at the Vatican in Rome, there has long been a statue of him, and Christians Catholics would kiss his foot. And some years ago that wasn't allowed anymore because it was getting worn out, but you could touch it, I think, now. But
yeah, the problem is though, that statue, the foot where they were kissing it and then rubbing it now, but it's been rubbed down so much that he actually has no toes left on this.
Right.
The foot is more like I know. Well, and that was back in 1998 when I was there, but it was like this like stump sticking out from under his robes because it'd been rubbed down so much over time. So here he has 6 toes. In Rome he has no toes.
Yeah. See this, and I researched the artist, and there's really not much about him I could find online. He wasn't, I guess, particularly prominent. He wasn't a Michelangelo or anything like that. So I really couldn't find anything, and it's still one of those things that's just kind of inconclusive. There's nobody really knows for sure why the artist chose.
That was the inside joke of the day. We're never going to know the truth to this one.
Yeah. Okay, now this is something I remember working on my Magnolia Cemetery book. At least probably 3 or 4 sites at Magnolia Cemetery. There are direct references, inscriptions that the person buried there was a slave owner. With wording like kind master. I see indulgent master, which of course could be taken different ways today.
Right.
But I was always taken aback by that. It kind of brought it home, slavery. Okay. And like, they would list the attributes of somebody, as you see. This was a former congressman, antebellum, that he was a kind and affectionate husband, true friend, indulgent master, just and generous. And like, okay. So people certainly weren't embarrassed by it. That's just the way it was. A lot of
Yep.
people of means did have slaves, enslaved people. So I did come across one in Stories from the Underground, a woman who, I think it said that she was a kind mistress instead of a master, a female or a slave. So yeah, that's something that stands out. Certainly after the Civil War, you wouldn't see that.
Right.
But before, it wasn't anything
Before,
people were
prior.
ashamed of. Okay. So the Unitarian Church, of all the ones in Charleston, looks like maybe the grounds crew got fired or went on strike because
I
it's
like your description as
overgrown.
shabby chic.
Yeah, shabby chic. Right. And it's a beautiful old church. Unitarians are definitely different. When we were in Boston, they saw the church that was the first Unitarian church in America. So it's and I thought, well, okay, that's a tradition of Unitarian churches, but it's not. It was actually the idea of the wife of a longtime pastor, Caroline Howard Gilman, who felt that that's the way churchyards should be. Okay, kind of, I don't know, ashes to ashes, the
Okay.
returning to the
Very
ground and things
natural.
like that. And she just felt like let's let it grow. That's the way it should be. And she wrote out a listing in the 1850s of all the people at that point in time who were buried there. And I found that through the Unitarian Church website. I was looking for it again. This was research a few years ago. I couldn't find it. I'm not sure if it's still linked, but I thought that was really neat that she took on. This was after her husband died, and there's a big monument memorial to her husband. And part of her thinking was, well, my husband has this big, fancy, beautiful, large monument, and why shouldn't other people here, members, have that? And so, a very egalitarian perspective. Another thing, and maybe you all have heard things about this, but it's definitely noticeable how a lot of the graves from the 1700s, 1800s are very specific.
Yeah.
How many years, how many months, how many days, right? And I've certainly noticed that, and I've questioned some people. I've never heard a definitive answer. Have you all?
No, I
Why
mean,
is
they
that
just did it
specific?
for, even we have graves here, even in Colorado, that do it. So I just think it was a thing to mark their exact age at death, or at least just if they knew their exact age at death.
Yeah, I was thinking too that the death notices from the coroner were very specific that way, with year, month, date. And I thought maybe the stonecutters, the funeral homes, whatnot, were like, okay, it should be that specific. Or maybe the stonecutters, they were charging by the letter
By the
or the
letter.
word or the number, so they could
True, and so they get
make
more
more
money.
money. But I got a kick out of a woman at the French Huguenot Church who died in recent times in 2006. She wanted to have that specific age, as you see, 67 years, 3 months, and 3 days. So
But her
tip
her
of the
entire
hat to Kay
stone.
Ward. I like her. I like your style, Kay. I thought that was
Yeah,
a
we got a
nice
slate
homage.
stone and
Mhm.
Yeah.
the
I
whole
like
thing.
that.
I observe people walking by because it's kind of near one of the fences, and like, oh, look at that old one there, that Kay Ward. And it's like thinking it was one of the old ones from maybe
Nope.
the 1700s, early 1800s. But
There are a couple of current monument companies that do specialize in these old style slate stones again. So
nice.
if you want that, which that's what I want on my grave, then
There
you
you
could totally
go.
get that.
Right. Nice.
I like that.
This is an interesting little story that I came across a couple years ago when we had some visitors down, friends from Richmond, and we did one of the carriage tours that are always a big thing in Charleston. And the particular route that we went on that day went down Logan Street, and I'd never heard of this before. The driver stopped and said, "Well, here's where St. Peter's Episcopal Church used to be, but a fire in 1861 destroyed the church, and it was never rebuilt. It was rebuilt some years later at a different location for some reason, but the graveyard still exists today." So you could drive by there. It's really spooky looking. It used to be maintained, but now, at least the last time I was by there, it was all overgrown. And a lot of very prominent old Charleston names are among those who are buried there.
Interesting.
And I contacted the Charleston County Public Library again, that research room. And I said, it's 1860. There's bound to be maybe some images of the church, drawings or photographs. And this was the only thing, but I'm glad
Wow.
the guy at least found this. He said, "I'm pretty sure that this is what it looked like." And again, it was built some blocks away, and just the graveyard was just left there. Kids growing up in the neighborhood used to play there. I found some old references to, oh yeah, let's go over to the graveyard and play, or that's where they would play and
Right.
stuff. But yeah, not so much today. Now, the last little item here is First Baptist Church. Remember how austere it is.
Mhm.
So when I visited there, and I had arranged for somebody to kind of show me around, and I always ask, okay, well, what's unique, distinctive? What are some of the unique characteristics? And the young lady pointed up to the balcony, and she said, "Look, take a close look." And I had to look for a minute or two, and you're probably not seeing my pointer, but the design element there is a little different with this one in the middle. Okay, see how the
yeah.
other one with a little, they remind me of those little what are those little blocks as kids we would play with and put those Legos. Thank you. So, but this one, they protrude more than all the other ones.
Yeah.
And I said, "Well, why was that done?" And she said, "Only God can create perfection." That was the theory of the architect, the
So putting in one
construction workers, the
imperfect element.
carpenters.
Yes.
Yeah. Somebody said that might have been the reason for St. Peter having 6 toes. But then I thought, well, the other 11 apostles, there's nothing like that. So again, I thought, you can't argue with that. Only God can create perfection. I'm like, okay,
Yeah.
I'll buy that. If we have time, I'll go into how I got involved in this kind of research.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yes.
great. Okay, good. So
It started
yeah,
with
it started with
storks. I love
storks.
this.
So the first time I ever visited Magnolia Cemetery was in 2008. It was during spring break. I was teaching at the College of Charleston, and I was tired of grading midterm exams. I wanted to just get outside. So I said, I've never been to this Magnolia Cemetery, even though I've lived in the Charleston area since 1990. So 2008, I venture over. I had a little Canon point and click camera at the time, and I just started walking around, and it was even raining a little bit. And so, oh, this is really neat. This place is just huge, and look at all these markers, how elaborate they are. And then I saw the back pond. I saw these big white birds, and I snapped a couple pictures, and they went up to this tree, this oak tree that extended over the pond, and I surreptitiously snuck up there, and I snapped a couple pictures. And then at that time, the newspaper in town on Sundays would run pictures of birds that readers would submit. And I contacted the editor, and I said, "I took these at Magnolia Cemetery. I really don't know what kind of birds they are. Do you know?" And she said, "Well, I think they might be wood storks." And she sent me a couple links, and sure enough, they were wood storks. And it ran in the paper, and I got my name in there, and I thought, oh, that was a pretty cool experience. So
I've never imagined storks sitting in a tree. Like,
oh yeah, they do.
I'm not even sure I've actually ever really seen maybe I've seen a stork in a zoo or something. I don't know, but to
Possibly.
see it sitting it so for our listeners who are just listening to the audio version, you've got two storks sitting on this big long tree branch that's
Right.
extending out over some of the graves at Magnolia Cemetery. It's a really cool photo. Like
It is
Oh,
you
a
had the
yeah.
thanks.
moment just right for that.
Yeah, thank you. They're indigenous to the southeast coast, and
Huh.
they're prehistoric looking. They're really unique. But just to put things in context, at that point in my life, I was really into golf. I like to say I would chase birdies with my driver and my putter. But then after this experience at Magnolia, I started chasing birdies with my binoculars and my camera. And it's true. I was kind of getting away from golf. So the place where I parked at College of Charleston, my teaching schedule allowed me a few days a week to kind of leave campus mid-afternoon. And before going home, Magnolia Cemetery was on my way to the interstate to go home. So I would just drop in and I'd walk around a little bit. I always had my camera, and I started to see these different birds. And I was
So
like,
many.
wow,
Yeah.
and so it became a kind of a hobby, an interest to try to get high quality pictures, but also to identify them, because I really wasn't into birds. So
Oh my
a
goodness.
couple years later, yeah, I made a little project during the Christmas holiday season. I said, I've been going there for, I don't know, a year and a half or so, maybe almost 2 years. I wonder how many different types of birds I've photographed. And I had more than 40 at
Wow.
that point. And so the idea came to do a book. I always felt like I might have a book or two in me. So after school ended that May, I got down and wrote The Birds of Magnolia Cemetery, Charleston's secret bird sanctuary, and it had almost 50 different types of birds, and it kind of the idea of a coffee table book.
Oh, how
And I
cool.
self-published it, and I had a lot of really good experiences with it. I had went over really well. I was able to get it in a lot of stores in the area. I had book signings and presentations, and so it's a neat experience. I'm still an active birder to this day. So then a year or so later, I was kind of like, okay, I really want to do a book about the cemetery itself and the people buried there. I've got the birds covered. And the woman you see in the picture, Beverly Donald, was a longtime superintendent there in charge of the cemetery for more than 40 years. She just retired earlier
Wow.
this year. And she was a big help. And we became, and still are, I think, pretty good friends. And she was very helpful as far as there's just vast amounts of information in safes and the records going back to 1850,
Oh, how
handheld,
cool.
so and so is buried here, and this is how much paid for the plot and
Mhm.
this sort of thing. So in 2014, I published In the Arms of Angels about Magnolia Cemetery. So yeah, this is how I broke it down. It's really a tribute to what I think is one of America's most beautiful and historic cemeteries. So I have a few chapters on the ones that I think are most magnificent and most memorable. I go into the Confederacy legacy. That was, of course, there's 2,000 or 3,000 veterans of the Confederate Army buried there, as well as a number of soldiers who were killed in action or died of diseases. The children of Magnolia Cemetery, that's something you're struck by in visiting these
Mm-hmm.
old 18th and 19th century, how many are graves of children. And then the symbology, the iconography, that's kind of a
Mm-hmm.
big thing of these Victorian cemeteries, isn't it? The
Oh yeah.
epitaphs can be very poignant. Another neat part of it is there's a monument making company just down the street from Magnolia, the entrance to Magnolia. And so I contacted the owner and I said, hey, if you have time one afternoon or morning, could you come walk around for an hour or so and just, what are your thoughts about how these artisans back then with just hammers and chisels were able to create these masterpieces, angels and big sculptures and
Mm-hmm.
human figures. And so we did that. So that's his modern monument maker's perspective. And then
So cool.
this newer section in the back called the Green Hill section, where there's still burials there. In fact, it used to be part of a golf course back in the turn of the century. And then I was able, with the help of Beverly Donald, access the old photographs. So there's several pages like old photographs of the Magnolia Cemetery. And when I had my draft finished, I realized I had 9 chapters. I thought, that's an odd number. I need one more chapter. Then I thought, well, how about more birds of Magnolia Cemetery? Because I had, in the 2 years or so, I'd photographed a lot of birds that weren't in that previous book.
Sure.
And so that's turned out to be a
Okay,
really
so
good project.
birders in the South or in the Charleston area. If you didn't know about Magnolia Cemetery, it's a place to go find the birds. Go
Well,
check it out.
it's no longer a secret sanctuary. In fact, it has its own Facebook site
Oh, cool.
that the superintendent's not too thrilled about, but yeah, they're very respectful, so it's all good. So you might recognize that woman in the middle here, then South Carolina Governor Nikki Haley, who ran for a Republican presidential, as you may remember. So Beverly Donald had an event in Columbia honoring some aspect of Magnolia Cemetery, and she presented Nikki Haley with my book.
Oh,
And
that's
the
very
fellow
cool.
on the right I met him at a book signing, and he was a descendant of Colonel Cunnington, who owned the property that the businessmen, there's a group of 5 or 6 Charleston businessmen who, they kind of knew what was going on with Mount Auburn and with these
Right.
cemeteries. They were like, they bought it from Colonel Cunnington, the property, and this was an ancestor of him. He came to my book signing and said, "Oh yeah, I'm related to him." And
Oh, that's
that was
cool.
pretty
That is
cool.
really cool.
And these are some ladies who came from, I think, Aiken. Before I was this was like my first thing with the book. They had heard about it somehow, and they're like, "We were going to come to Charleston. Can you meet us? We all want to get your book." And so it was really cool experience.
How fun.
Now, just another thing that contributed to sort of my background, I worked and taught at College of Charleston for many, many years. And the last several years, 5 years, in fact, I had an opportunity to design and teach a course called Beyond the Grave, What Old Cemeteries Tell and Teach the Living. So it was for a freshman first year experience course.
That's
and
cool
those
course.
are courses,
Cool
thank
title
you,
too.
courses that faculty wouldn't normally offer, kind of
Right.
special interests. So yeah, multidisciplinary course, elements of history, religion, art, genealogy, psychology, sociology, anthropology, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, it was an
That's
interesting
cool.
experience. And I would get them out because College of Charleston is right downtown, and it's within easy walking distance of 3 or 4 of the churches that I would end up writing about. And would also do a little excursion towards the end of the semester to Magnolia Cemetery, had to arrange transportation. But one of the speakers I always brought in, a woman named Ruth Miller, who's a very knowledgeable Charleston tour guide, and she has written small booklets about some of the churches that are in my book, and other things. She's written other books as well. So I kind of consider her a mentor. She's the one who I first heard the word taphophile from, and she would talk to the students about Lord Anthony Ashley Cooper and I only need 7 people to form a religion, and what was distinctive about that. So yeah,
How
still
cool.
really good friends with Ruth. And in the course of how I did the class Beyond the Grave, I would form the students into groups. We would do that walking tour early on. I did that a few times, so they could say, "Okay, here's all the different churches. You get to see them firsthand and make a list. Which one do you think you might be interested in kind of adopting for the semester, and to do different projects
Oh,
that I
cool.
kind of came up with, including research on people buried there. And I also had them do research on one of their ancestors. It had to be somebody, I always said this, they can't be living. It has to be somebody who's died, who's dead.
They
like
have to have a grave somewhere.
Even a grandparent or great grandparent. So that was always, and I'd have them do presentations, and some of those were really, really interesting.
That is so cool.
So the
So
Yeah,
students
we're
got to
always
know
talking
that,
about getting younger people to do that kind of stuff. The fact that you were able to incorporate that into their college course is phenomenal.
Really, yeah.
and they did blogs too, and so would write about. That's how I'd kind of grade
That's
their
so cool.
work, and so they got introduced to that. So yeah, that's how I got to know all these churches more too, and realized that there were 14 that had active burial grounds. And so that led to me putting this book together, and it was a good time. Actually, during COVID, it
Yep.
was time could still, I mean, who's going to bother you? Can I go walk through your graveyard? And not ready. Could I come inside for an hour? So yeah, it
Oh,
was not a bad time, I guess, to do even during COVID, a book like that. And yeah, so this is my fifth book, and thanks. That's pretty much it as far as the stories from the underground
well,
part.
I was gonna say, you've done so much research. It helps, like,
Mhm.
again, you had students to help you do your research too, which was great because you could kind of gather some of their information and stories and help put that all together, which
Right.
more is better sometimes when you're trying to do research because it can be hard doing it all by yourself. But this is fascinating.
Oh, thank you.
And
It's been fun sharing it.
it definitely makes us, again, as we said at the beginning of the show, Charleston is on the bucket list anyway to go visit the other cemeteries there. I've never been, so it's definitely something I've been wanting to do. Um,
We just
yeah,
Yeah.
it's
we
just
just need to do
fascinating.
it. That's all. We
I
just
know
need
we
to.
just need to book our plane tickets and go.
Again, yeah, let me know. I'll be happy to meet up with you and show you around some. But if we have time, I can talk a bit about this other recent research.
Yes, you were telling us a
Yes.
story about
Okay,
a
let
woman
me get
who
out
died
of.
in a very recent car accident, or not recent car accident, 1913. So,
I
you
don't
know,
even know what this is. Okay.
when we were really starting to get into driving, more specifically.
Right. Oh, are you
Which
seeing
this will be an
this?
interesting story as you pull this up. My dad, who restores Model Ts, and he's part of the Model T Association of America, all
Okay.
of that stuff. They just started their road trip
Okay.
in the 10 millionth Model T to come off the assembly line in 1924. So the car is now
Wow.
100 years old this year. And they are driving from New York to San Diego, mostly along what was the Lincoln Highway. There's a few parts where it doesn't quite exist anymore, so they have to make slight detours for the trip.
Mm-hmm.
But they just started their trip on Sunday. So that was,
Wow.
you know, about the same time that when that car, I mean, this car accident would
Oh,
have been a little bit
sure.
earlier, but
Right.
yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, I call this the rabbit hole of research. Um,
We have
Trudy, she
lots of
goes
those.
went by Trudy. Uh, she's in my In the Arms of Angels Magnolia Cemetery book, but I just had a little bit about her. She's in my symbols chapter because this large
Yeah.
woman figure and how
Mhm.
she looks so sad and is mourning. And so I'll just read what I just have a short little item about her as far as the symbolism. So over time, tree branch growth has hidden our Trudy from the passing public. It's a shame because such beauty, elegance, and artistic skill should be more easily seen. The lack of direct sun has darkened the mournful woman's face, giving her an almost sinister look. But a closer look reveals a lovely young woman with long hair, lips pursed, eyes cast down in sadness. In her left hand, she holds a long growth of lilies, a popular symbol of innocence and purity.
Oh.
In her right hand, she is depicted as dropping flowers, though part of the flower has been broken off. The gesture that this gesture is up for interpretation. It can symbolize the spreading of blessings, or if you believe she is picking flower, or you believe she's picking flowers and not dropping, it can be seen as the harvesting of souls. Our Trudy, which is her nickname, it's nice that was put there instead of Gertrude. That our Trudy was Gertrude L.T. Mordecai, who was 19 when she died in 1913. She died from an accident that was not possible many years before, a car crash in which she suffered a fractured skull. It
Ugh.
happened in Glens Fall, New York. Trudy was the first child of lawyer T. Moultrie Mordecai and German-born her mother, Gertrude A. Mordecai. But I was always curious about that she died in a car accident. And again, Henry Ford mentioned the Model Ts, started cranking those out, maybe 5 years before. So an early car fatality. And there's other things that intrigued me about her. And one of them being Mordecai is a Jewish name. And
Mhm.
I think it's safe to say at Magnolia Cemetery, although it's not linked with any kind of religion, there probably aren't that many Jews there. So that was kind of interesting to me that she was buried there. And as I sort of did more research in recent months, we were there in, I think, March of this year, and the azaleas were blooming. And I just thought, oh, it's so pretty. And I just kind of went and looked at Trudy's marker and took these pictures and started to think I want to do some more research in it. So back in 2014 or so, I did find the cause of death, probably through ancestry. That's how I knew that she died in an automobile accident. But then in recent times, I did find a couple mentions of the fatality itself. And it's kind of funny because I did contact that South Carolina room at the library and gave them the information I had. I'm trying to find out more about what was she doing in New York, anything more about the car accident. And it's quite, I found two different ones, but the first one I found from a Lake George area newspaper. You can see the automobile of Judge T.M. Mordecai, her father of Charleston, South Carolina, was wrecked on Bolton Road late this afternoon, fatally injuring his daughter Gertrude. And it lists the other passengers. She had her sister was there, Cornelia, another young lady from Savannah, and it was driven by a chauffeur, actually. The sister escaped with bruises and cuts. The other young woman, arm broken. The mother, Mrs. Mordecai, was at the ground where the family's built. See, this explained what the family was doing up there, and I'll get to that more, but they were building the summer home. The daughters were going to meet her. In passing another car at a speed of 50 miles per hour, the right front tire exploded. That'd be a big lawsuit today, wouldn't it? And the machine plunged into a tree in front of the lawyers would be licking their chops, plunged into a tree in front of the residence. I don't know if you know this name, George Foster Peabody, journalism's Peabody Awards. I'll touch back on him.
I was going to say the Peabody name is fairly well known, but I wasn't sure.
Yes. Oh, yeah. So I was struck too by this was reporting 100 years ago. Her skull was crushed. That's a lot of information. She was rushed to Glens Falls Hospital where she died an hour later. The judge, the father, wasn't with the family. He was at his Charleston home, having just returned there. He needed to return early.
Right.
Okay. But they also mentioned the chauffeur, and then Jenny, you would know, isn't 50 miles an hour?
That was fast? Very fast, which makes me think they must have been going downhill. Because most of those cars, and Ford or otherwise, there were other brands of cars at the time too, besides Ford. But I mean, their top speeds were generally 30, 35 miles an hour if you were going like on a level road straight. But if you were going downhill, you could get up to higher speed. And of course, those older cars like that didn't really have great speedometers. They had some form of a speedometer that you could put on and stuff. So that was kind of being a guesstimate, but I could see where if those tires, and especially a 1913, probably had wooden spokes at the time. So if that tire exploded and it fell off the axle, you could see where that whole car would just, and of course there were no seatbelts or other safety features in those cars. So I mentioned the South Carolina room that I sought help, and they weren't able to come up with anything. So I was like, I just did a Google search. I don't know why I didn't think of that earlier, but that's where I found those two articles, including this one that a Plattsburgh, New York paper did 100 years later. I guess they have a recurring feature, news from 100 years ago. And it was about that accident. It has some different details than the previous one. In fact, it says that the mother was in the car, but okay, so 2:00, July 12th, near the George Foster Peabody residence, Gertrude was fatally injured. The sister, the chauffeur, we already covered that. The time of the accident, the Mordecai machine was headed toward Bolton, and turning out for an approaching car, a tire burst, and without a moment's warning, the machine crashed into a tree, throwing the occupants with terrific force to the ground. Gertrude Mordecai was rendered unconscious and bleeding profusely
They had a
Poor
lot of
thing.
details back then, didn't it? She
Yeah.
was picked up and placed in an automobile driven by Royal Peabody, the brother of George Foster. I'll talk more about that in a minute. He, who with all possible haste hurried to the Glens Falls Hospital, but on the way, death overtook the young woman. Her skull had been fractured and the brain lacerated. The condition of the other passengers. Oh,
Mm.
they'd been in a Glens Fall on a shopping tour, and they were headed homeward at the time of the accident. The chauffeur was in no way at fault, as he did his best to avoid crashing into the tree. The Mordecai family had been in Lake George for about 8 weeks and were staying at the James W. Lockhart Cottage until the time when their new home on the Bolton Road could be completed. Mr. Mordecai is a prominent Charleston attorney.
Mm. This is probably why he had to return. He had work to do. Oh, there it is.
Yeah, so this, I could never find anything out to the exact type of vehicle, but this was probably the type of vehicle they were in. This is a 1930 vehicle of the time, and it's open,
Mhm.
and you see how, I mean, no seat belts, and even the two women in the back, that looks kind of precarious. I guess that's the driver, the chauffeur on the left there, but you can just kind of imagine that type of
Yeah.
vehicle, 50 miles per hour.
Yeah.
Yeah, another thing, again, I was interested in what they were doing up in that part of New York. So I did some research on that area, Lake George. It's in the Adirondack Mountains. Looks like a beautiful area.
Oh, yeah.
Rich in French and Indian War and Revolutionary War history. In the 1890s, thanks to railroad and steamboat services,
Mhm.
the wealthy began to flock to the lake and its grand hotels for summer vacations. This was kind of before Florida really took off. In fact, I don't know if you
He
know
went
anything
north
about,
instead of south.
well, yeah, Jekyll Island, Georgia, which is south of here, became popular that way also. Wealthy
Right.
tycoons would have cottages.
Their summer
But so this
homes.
was taking off in New York. With the enhanced railroad and steamboat services, the wealthy began to flock to the lake and its grand hotels. Falling in love with Lake George, many of these wealthy families purchased large tracts of shoreline property to create their own private summer retreats. A millionaire's row of homes were built. So a little bit more on the family. This is the judge, although there's some issue whether he was actually a judge, but he was an attorney, Thomas Moultrie Mordecai, and his wife Gertrude had two daughters, Gertrude and Cornelia. His law firm in 1910 moved to the new People's Office building downtown. At that time, it was 8 stories and considered a skyscraper. So the tire blew out on the machine, striking a tree on the property of George Foster Peabody. He was an associate of John D. Rockefeller,
Hmm.
Standard Oil.
Yep.
So he was rich, very wealthy, I'm sure. And his brother, Royal, the one who helped at the scene, George's younger brother, Royal, placed Trudy, who was unconscious and bleeding profusely, in his car. But again, she died on the way apparently. And something also unsolved is, did the family finish building the house? I mean, would you have
Oh,
wanted to,
yeah.
if
Maybe
something
they,
like that happened?
Right.
I never could find that out for sure, but
maybe that was they decided it wasn't worth completing and sold the property to somebody else.
yeah. So a curious thing, as I mentioned earlier, why would she be buried at Magnolia Cemetery? Because right two doors down, as far as the Magnolia Cemetery, that cemetery district I mentioned, back in the 1850s, the KKBE synagogue started its own cemetery,
Right.
and her father's father had built this mausoleum there, and that's in fact where the father's buried. So the question is, well, why wasn't Trudy just put there? That already existed. Okay, so for this assistance, I contacted the special collections at the Charleston County Library. A gentleman, Harlan Green, who's the archivist there, who in fact wrote a nice blurb on the back of my book after he proofread it. But I said, hey, is there any way you could help? And there's a Jewish collection there, and he put somebody there on it. and came up with some answers. So yeah, the things leading up to that. Trudy's father is interred here, as are Thomas's parents and mother. I'm going to touch on this too. The grandfather was born in first one who came, Mordecai, the Cohen side of the family. He emigrated from Poland, became an amazing success story, going from street peddler to, according to one account, the second wealthiest man in South Carolina.
Wow.
He's in the book at the KKBE Cumming Street Cemetery. He was a shopkeeper, real estate. He had plantations and slaves, but it was also a great benefactor to, among others, the Charleston Poorhouse and Orphan House. Mordecai Cohen and his wife are buried at the KKBE Cumming Street Cemetery. Fun fact: Thomas, her would have been her grandfather, and his wife had either 16 or 18 children.
Wow.
That's a lot of children. So a little bit about the patriarch, Mordecai Cohen, as I mentioned, one of the few Jews to become landed gentry. He had a plantation along the Ashley River. This is kind of, I call this the rabbit hole, because this kind of, you find out about Trudy and her family, and then you realize, oh, they're connected to this very wealthy Charlestonian who came from Poland and is buried somewhere else. So Mordecai Cohen purchased 119 Broad Street in 1811. That some years later would become the offices for the Catholic Diocese of Charleston, and was recently purchased by Darius Rucker of Hootie and the Blowfish fame, who's from Charleston. So what he's going to do with it, not quite sure, but maybe he'll live there. So there's a picture of Mordecai Cohen's grave. They had 5 children, including Lucretia, who would marry Thomas.
Oh, that's so cool.
Oh, okay. I'm kind of getting ahead of myself. But what I learned was, Trudy's mother was Thomas's second wife, and she wasn't Jewish. Okay. So the rule in that faith is that the mother has to be Jewish to be buried in a Jewish cemetery.
So that's why she's buried in Magnolia.
Right. So she couldn't be
with her daughter.
Yeah, right. She couldn't be buried there.
That makes sense then.
Interesting rule. But so there's some other sort of that part of the family. The sister is buried there, and others. But then this Cohen family, this is what the Cumming Street Cemetery looks like. When I worked at College of Charleston, I would drive down Cumming Street for years and years. I mean, before I really got interested in cemeteries, I never knew what this was, these walls, kind of foreboding walls, but that's Cumming Street Cemetery. Okay.
That's so cool.
And one of the relatives was a doctor during he was in the Confederate Army, and he was killed in one of the last great battles up in Bentonville, North Carolina. He and another soldier, there was like ammunition or something that didn't blow up. So he volunteered to go out and, let's get it out of here. Let's take it to safety. And when they ran out there, they got shot by a Union sniper, and he died. So there was a notice that I came across as to his funeral. So again, the rabbit hole, and he has this is at Cumming Street Cemetery. It has
like
a cannon
on the bottom of his grave.
Cannon is closed. There's like something in it, a stopper, symbolizing death, and you have the flags of the Confederacy there, and special marker that is there recognizing him. So feel like I kind of solved the mystery of Trudy Mordecai and why she's there.
And also learned a whole bunch more about her family.
Yeah, exactly.
That's
all
the
her
thing
other
about this type of research. You really can learn so much.
Well, this was amazing.
Fascinating. It really was. It was like, oh my God, I've been wanting to go back for decades now. I really want to go back now.
Yeah.
So Jenny,
Yeah, I don't know if you've had many Southerners on your program before. So have you?
We've had a couple. But yeah, we haven't spent as much time in the Southern cemeteries though, or covering the Southern cemeteries. I feel like we've done several Georgia cemeteries. We've had several in Georgia. We've had some in Arkansas. I don't know if Arkansas is really considered the South, but it's closer to the South than some of the other states.
Some of our first ones.
Yeah, one of our first ones was Arkansas. But yeah, I think this was amazing to hear. And South Carolina and Charleston in particular, there is so much history and there is a lot to learn about. Again, I didn't know much about Charleston until a few years ago. It hadn't really been on my radar until I started doing other research. Some of it has to do with Edgar Allan Poe and stuff like that. But because he has those connections there. And then when I realized that, I was like, oh, okay, Charleston's definitely on the bucket list. And as you mentioned earlier, I've heard the food is spectacular.
Yes. Yeah, excellent restaurants. Got the beaches close by.
Yeah.
Got lots of history. We've got wildlife management areas where the old rice plantations existed, are protected now. So you can go out, if you're into nature photography like I am, you can do little excursions and just walk around and see where the slaves toiled in the rice fields. And no buildings or restrooms or anything. It's just very remote. And if you like photography and just kind of getting away from it all, yeah, it's a lot of, I've done lots of photography and different birds I've seen over time, and to me it's a really interesting place to live.
So when is the best time to visit?
Yeah, the spring and the fall. The winters are mild too. It can get really hot during the summer. Like right now, it's getting into low 90s and high humidity. Yeah. So, but that's a good time to go to the beach and go to the ocean.
Well, that's when I visited. It was in August, and it was 100 degrees, and the humidity was 100%, and I thought I was going to die. But this might be a winter excursion.
I was going to say it might be great in the winter when it's a little more mild.
It's just not green now. Right.
Hurricane season just started, and it's a prediction that there's going to be more hurricanes than usual along the southeast. In fact, we were in Boston at our hotel. When we said we were from Charleston, we met a lady who said, "Oh, I was planning to go to Charleston this fall with some girlfriends, but then we heard about the hurricane prediction, so we canceled it."
Oh,
you never know.
Yeah,
But yeah, that's something you have to deal with in this part of the country.
Yeah. But well, Patrick, thank you so much for joining us today. So this has been fascinating.
Thanks for having me.
Folks, we will link the books in the show notes. So if you're interested in purchasing his new book, all about the Charleston, all of these graveyards, he goes through all of them again, and you can see the pictures and read more details. So we'll make sure those are linked so you guys can purchase that. And it was fascinating to learn more about Charleston and its cemetery. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Patrick.
Appreciate it. Yes, you too.
We thank you for taking time to join us today for this ordinary, extraordinary chat. To learn more about today's discussion, please visit our website, theordinaryextraordinarycemetery.com, where you will find additional links in our show notes. And if you're watching us on YouTube, be sure to give us a like and subscribe to our channel, The Ordinary Extraordinary Cemetery Podcast. This really makes us more visible to others on YouTube who may also enjoy our podcast.
And please don't forget to visit us on social media, where we share all kinds of cemetery photos, quotes, tidbits, and more. We are on Facebook and Instagram at Ordinary Extraordinary Cemetery, and on X at OrdExtraCem. So OrdExtraCem. If you enjoyed this or any of our episodes, please consider leaving a 5-star review and a comment on Apple's podcast, Spotify, or directly on our website. You can also leave those same comments on YouTube. Your positive reviews and enthusiasm for our show help others who love cemeteries and history to discover us and all of our ordinary, extraordinary stories. And if you're feeling extra generous and want to help support the podcast in a financial way, you can now buy Diane and I a cup of coffee, either through YouTube or on our website. Simply click on the coffee cup icon and it will allow you to make a donation.
Until we meet again.